Welcome to the ISB show. Sahil Rahi here. We are bringing you an episode on the CONCACAF Gold Cup Final. We waited until the mainstream media and some of the other sources had their say. We like to do that so we can settle, everything can settle. We can approach these things with a clear mind, take some of the emotion out of it, Rahi, because it was a very emotional match. We're going to cover what's next for the U.S. men's national team. We're going to cover what's next for Mexico after that Gold Cup victory. We'll start off with what happened in the Gold Cup final. And one team was happy, which of course was Mexico, and the U.S. men's national team, Rahi, not so much in a valiant effort.
Valiant, yes, but not enough. And we have to be honest. Beginning the tournament, we said Mexico looks comfortable. They looked comfortable throughout the tournament. They looked comfortable in the final for the most part. Should have expected it, right?
Yeah, I think we all picked Mexico just based on the fact that the U.S. men's national team brought a B squad to the tournament, right? I think the bigger thing was whether Panama could win or whether Canada could win, right? Because they were more or less A teams, of course, missing some key players on those teams as well. But overall, Mexico was the favorite to get it done, and they got it done in this final. It was an interesting final, though.
Yeah, but it was a strange final. It was like in the early stages, I thought the U.S. had control for about 10 minutes or so. Of course, getting the early goal. And something shifted. It was as if the U.S. lost control. Mexico was able to get a foothold in the game. A lot of that had to do with the way the wide fullbacks were playing, particularly Arfston on that side. We can get to that in a second. But I think once Mexico got a foothold in the game, the U.S. couldn't get the ball back. They literally could not possess the ball. And from there, yes, Mexico didn't look very dangerous, but the U.S., I think, needed to have more of the ball. And when they did go forward, they looked dangerous, but the Mexico goal felt kind of inevitable, even though Mexico didn't do a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of talking points which will extrapolate out. Let's get into it because I think we're going to go a little bit deeper maybe than some of the other stuff we've heard out there, just in terms of some of the nuances of the match, because you made a very important point. If we were to say what happened in this particular match, what would you say it was the problem? Because we saw the goal by Chris Richards in the first 10 minutes. All the U.S. fans were euphoric, ecstatic. The U.S. looked like they were doing very well in terms of not dominating, but they were in control of the match. And then it all fell apart. And where did it fall apart for you?
Yeah, I think it fell apart in the wide areas for me. And the difference in the game was the fullbacks. I mean, let alone the fact that Mexico has an incredible striker in Raul Jimenez, who's on fire, playing the best he's ever played in his career. And of course, Edson Alvarez is a good midfielder. And of course, they have a young kid in Mora who looks like he's going to be a game changer.
Yeah.
But for me, it's the wide fullbacks. And the problem, you could see the big difference in talent. Turning defense into possession, right? When you win the ball back, can you then possess the ball? Can you find an outlet in a midfielder? Can you then turn that into a counterattack or turn that into a spell of possession? To be honest, in some ways, the U.S. didn't defend poorly, but they couldn't. When they were able to win the ball, everything was so desperate, right? It was a clearance. It was never to anyone for feet. It was never to a midfielder. It was either a long ball or it was an outlet that was really going nowhere. And that's mostly, to me, on those two wide fullbacks who every time they would win the ball or were there in position to get the ball, they would give it away all the time. It's also on a player like Tyler Adams, who wasn't available as much as he should be. He wasn't getting the positions to receive the ball. It's also honestly on Malik Tillman, who was not doing that either, even though he had some bright moments. So really, for me, it's the two wide fullbacks and it's the defensive midfield area. There was no outlet. And when we did get the ball, the only guy who looked calm and assured on the ball was a 37-year-old, right? Tim Ream. And Chris Richards looked okay as well. But you need to possess the ball. You need to take those moments when you win it back and turn that into possession and then attacking opportunities.
Yeah. And of course, Diego Luna had a little bit of a quiet match overall.
Yeah, I mean, but you have to say, right, he was helping a lot Arfston on that side. That's not an excuse for the way Diego Luna played, but it certainly took up a lot of his attention. And I think he couldn't get forward as much as he wanted to. You saw Pochettino trying to get him to play more up. But at the same time, when you have a fullback who really isn't a fullback in Arfston, who really struggled defensively, I understand the desire to help out on that side. And I understand why he did that.
Yeah. Okay. So let's extrapolate it out a little bit, right? Because I think these are some points, and I want to talk a little bit to those who know this team well, and also those fans who maybe are going to be coming on board for the U.S. men's national team leading up to the World Cup, and kind of explain some of the things that you were talking about. And what I mean by that is those deficiencies in terms of the wing backs that you're talking about, right? Are you basically saying that the players that played at this particular Gold Cup, those guys are not going to be good enough to make the full national team?
I mean, there's someone that will make the team.
Yeah.
Diego Luna is a shoo-in, right? He's potentially a starter for the World Cup. He's an incredible player. He's really changed the narrative about him in a short amount of time. Malik Tillman looks like he's definitely going to be on the team, also potentially a starter, right? Beyond that, Chris Richards, we already know is a starter, and he's sort of in pen now in that position. Beyond that, I agree. These players to me didn't look like anyone aside from Luca De La Torre who looked good. Everyone else, I thought, yeah, they're not really at the level, right? They're not at the World Cup level. They're not at the international level. It doesn't mean it's a waste, but it means that they're not there. And that's okay because if everyone's healthy, Anthony Robinson comes in and slots in, and that's a huge upgrade on one side. And fingers crossed, Sergino Dest is healthy on the other side. That's a huge upgrade on the right? So it could be an entirely different back line. And this team has always gone the way that the fullbacks have played. In many ways, Anthony Robinson, when healthy, is the most important player on the U.S.
Yeah. And I think as the team now, right, as a whole, how much would you read into this particular tournament and what came of it and the final itself?
Well, Shauna made a good point, I think, on a video earlier about we need to temper expectations, right? This is not a world-beating team. It's a team that hasn't beat a significantly good opponent in a long, long time. They've beaten Mexico in the past under Greg Berhalter. Now they've lost to Mexico twice. They really don't have a signature victory in many, many years. This generation hasn't beaten a team, a European team, really, right? So should we really be expecting that much of this team? And we went into this tournament, our expectations were as low as they could be. There were a lot of people talking about with this squad, after being dismantled by Switzerland, could they even get out of the group in the Gold Cup,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I think we have to be honest about the expectations and be honest about the fact that there's some positivity. There is some positivity. They played together. There was some fight. They got lucky. They didn't play incredibly well. But then again, look at the players on the field. Should we have been expecting any more? I mean, think about where these players are. And if you're honest about the roster that was on the field today, there's a huge gap between them and the Mexican team on the other side. This roster is also not as good as the Canadian team that was brought, also not as good as the Panama team that was brought, right? So there's a bit of a gap. For me, what's next is how do you take some of the positives? How do you take some of the spirit, some of the fight they showed? How do you bring that now when you bring the A guys back in?
Yeah.
And what does that mean, right? Because Diego Luna embodies all the fight we want from this team. But can he transfer that over to a guy like Christian Pulisic, who, to be honest, has had a horrendous summer despite not playing a game?
Yeah, and I think, look, there's some names that I think from this particular Gold Cup you talked about it are going to be there, right? The Tillman, who increases stock, Luna, who increases stock, De La Torre increases stock. Matt Freese, I think, has to be on the roster. He probably won't start, maybe, but he has to be on the roster for penalties. He's being a penalty specialist. So I think there was a lot of good that was accomplished in this particular tournament, despite not beating a Mexico team that they weren't supposed to beat, right? In theory. So then that you'll see the US in action in September.
Well, I just want to say this.
Go ahead. Yes.
That doesn't mean that suddenly we're saying the US is good.
Yeah.
What we're saying is that the US is bad, and they have been bad for some time, but they showed some positive signs. So it's almost like resetting, right? Restarting from zero. So if you start from zero after the Nations League, then this is marginal improvement, right? And then you're working your way to a World Cup. We ignore everything that went before. And that's the point I'm making. I'm not suddenly saying this is a successful tournament for the US. It's just that based on where we were, it's progress.
And then how about with Pochettino? You think this is for Pochettino was a success for himself?
Not a success. I think for him there was some successful elements, and he's going to be happy about the players he unearthed, particularly Diego Luna, he didn't even make the Olympic team, right? So there's going to be things he's very happy about. He's going to be very happy about the culture that he started to inculcate in this team, the kind of fight that he's brought back. But look, it can't be a success because they didn't play particularly well throughout the tournament. Yeah. But the question's going to be, can this culture that he thinks he's built, can that transfer over? then it's a success. But it's too early to tell.
Yeah, and I think the thing also is going to be we need to judge this team very carefully in the next friendlies because every single friendly that comes up from now on out has to be judged like this Gold Cup was or like the Nations League was. Every single individual match has to be given that weight because we don't have major tournaments like some of the other teams do, right? Along the way in terms of qualification, right? They're going to have qualification campaigns. The US does not. So another team that will not have a qualification campaign is Mexico. And we want to talk about Mexico because the storyline, right, has been congratulations to Mexico. They won the Gold Cup, all these sort of things, which it should be, right? Because in the last 24 hours, that's exactly what happened. And you see all the praise out there, 10th Gold Cup final victory. But some things you pointed out at the match, I want to say, I looked at this match, and after the fact, I was like, if I was Mexico, I wouldn't be all that jubilant based on what happened here.
Yeah, I mean, it was professional. They were in possession the entire game. They were in control of the ball. They didn't create a ton of chances, let's be honest, right?
Yeah.
And any Mexican fan will also tell you, the goal is not to win the Gold Cup. They're happy to do so.
Yeah.
But the goal is el quinto partido. The goal is to get deep in the knockout phases of a World Cup. And let's be honest, what you do in the Gold Cup means very little about how you're going to do in the World Cup. So even any Mexican player, any Mexican fan, even the most optimistic will tell you this doesn't matter. What matters is next summer. And what matters now is how do these players gel over the course of, they've already gelled, right? But how do they continue to play together? And how healthy can these guys remain? Because Mexico, unfortunately, has been the victim of some serious injuries prior to big tournaments, right?
Yeah.
But
I want to more talk about what was happening in this match in terms of the defense, because every single foray that the U.S. team, this BUS team, right, with Patrick Agyemang, who everyone has been criticizing in terms of his striking ability, but he caused all kinds of problems in terms of the Mexican defense. Every ball into their box was an adventure.
Yeah, real questions. I agree. Real questions in the back. They couldn't deal with some of these simple aerial balls. Yeah. When you think about the chances that were created, yes, okay, the free kick, fine. But then the one at the end of the first half where Freeman basically has to clear it over Malagon, and he gets very lucky because it hits him off his head. Then you're right. There were a couple of chances in the second half off aerial balls again. There's one where Agyemang has it, and it's a bit fortunate the ball bounces around. I think Mexico has to have concerns in the back, certainly, dealing with some of the height, dealing with some of the physicality. I thought they didn't do well with Agyemang, surprisingly. I thought Montes didn't do well with Agyemang. So I think there's question marks for Mexico, absolutely. Where there are no question marks is up front, right? Because Raul Jimenez looks a world beater. Santi Jimenez, if you play them together, it's incredible. And if 16-year-old Mora is, I mean, what a find, right? What a player, and he's going to be a World Cup starter at 17 or whatever, right? Incredible.
Yeah, it's quite incredible. So that closed the chapter for both of these teams. Any last thoughts you have before we move forward and we get to see these teams again in September?
Well, let's give Javier Aguirre a ton of credit, right? Yeah. He's managed this team in a very calm, steady way. There's not often calm around Mexico, but there is now, and that's the best thing they can have going into the tournament.
Yeah.
And on the other side with Pochettino, I mean, what's your take? Because I've heard different things about, tactically they looked a bit of a mess. He took some of the wrong players. I just think it's so early to tell. I mean, what meaningful games really where you've had the first team and you felt like this is a big moment? When has he had that? I don't think I can judge him yet.
I think a lot will be judged in this Japan and Korea, these next two matches with the U.S. men's national team has against Japan and Korea. I think we will, like I mentioned earlier, need to see how does this team, with the A players that will be back for that, how does this team perform in those matches?
Yeah.
So we shall see. For everyone enjoying the videos, please subscribe to the channel. Let us know your thoughts on what's next for the U.S. men's national team. Which of these players that came out of the Gold Cup do you think belong in the roster and belong in the friendly lineup that comes when the team comes back in September? So just let us know how that goes, how you feel about that. Keep watching the beautiful game, and we'll see you guys soon.